This is IAQ Radio, Indoor Air Quality Radio, the voice of the indoor air quality industry, with your hosts, Radio Joe Hughes and the Z-Man, Cliff Zlotnick. And now, Radio Joe Hughes.
Good day and welcome to IAQ Radio Plus, episode 714. And this week we welcome Andrew and Kelvin Rynhart of Tramex Meters. We're going to talk about moisture monitoring in the 21st century, new technologies, remote monitoring, and integration with estimating and documentation platforms. Before we get started, let's thank our sponsors. They're the reason we can continue doing the show. And don't forget about afterthoughts.iaqradio.com, sponsored by First On Site. IAQ Radio Plus marquee sponsor is First On Site Property Restoration at firstonsite.com. IAQ Radio Association sponsors are ACGIH, the American Conference of Governmental Industrial Hygienists at acgih.org. AIHA, the American Industrial Hygiene Association at aiha.org. IICRC, the Institute for Inspection, Cleaning, and Restoration Certification at iicrc.org. The Restoration Industry Association, RIA, at restorationindustry.org. The Environmental Information Association, EIA, at eia-usa.org. IAQ Radio industry sponsors are Particles Plus at particlesplus.com, TSI Inc. at tsi.com, Tramex Meters at tramexmeters.com, and Healthy Indoors Magazine at healthyindoors.com.
And now you can win a cool prize. It's time for the IAQ Radio Trivia question. Be the first to correctly answer. Simply email your answer to czlotnick at cs.com. Or if listening live, just text your answer from your computer. And now, here's the Z-Man.
Hello, everyone. Congratulations go out to John Corliss, who's with Peer Consultants in Washington, D.C. He was first to identify clean air delivery rate, CADR, as the standard developed by the Association of Appliance Manufacturers in the 1980s to measure the performance of air purifying devices. Here's today's trivia question. Name the electrical engineering term defined as the measure of the opposition that a circuit presents when a voltage is applied. Back to you, Joe.
Okay, we've got Andrew Rynhart. He's the Chief Technical Officer of Tramex. He was taught from a young age about moisture in buildings from his father, who was the founder of Tramex Meters along with their mother, and inventor of the first commercially successful non-destructive moisture meters for building inspection. He's learned from the best moisture professionals in the roofing, flooring, IAQ, water damage, and pest control industries. We also have Kelvin Rynhart, the sales director of Tramex Meters. He's been part of Tramex leadership team for almost 15 years in sales and as the managing director. Prior to joining Tramex, he was a general manager at Mayfield Properties in Ireland. Welcome, gentlemen. Great to have you.
Great to be here. Thank you, Joe.
Andrew, welcome back. Kelvin, welcome for the first time. Great to meet you. Do us a favor, Kelvin. Our listeners know a little bit about Andrew. Tell us a little bit about your background and what you do at Tramex.
Okay, well, I'm basically the salesman, so I'm spinning the yarns when Andrew's telling the truth. That's basically how it works.
You were also in direct contact with the people in the field doing this type of work.
Very true, very true.
I'm wondering, how do you determine, like, you've got a couple new offerings we're going to talk about today, but how do you determine what new products are needed in the field?
Good question. So I don't. That's the answer. But the first answer is that the customers basically will ask us for things constantly. Great ideas you get from customers. Andrew's the one who'll take it and put it to good use and turn it into something that makes sense. So basically, I think the customers are the ones who tell us what they need. And of course, we come at it from one particular direction. I suppose different than other moisture meter manufacturers. Andrew will maybe explain a little better, but we come from a different angle at it, and we stick with what we know and what works for us.
And Andrew, what are the trend lines right now in moisture monitoring? What are the kind of the new things that people are looking at and what are you looking at Tramex for the future?
There's a few things to that. One is combining different measurements to get more meaningful, more in-depth meaning to the results. So we come from a history in the industry of different products competing with each other, where they should really complement each other. So we're seeing a sort of return to that. People are focusing on pinning and mapping and somehow like measurement versus scanning or comparative readings. So we're seeing a return to that. We're including also temperature sensors into the meters so that we get good information about combining psychrometrics with moisture measurements.
When we had you on a while back now, we were talking about those issues a little bit, and it seemed, maybe I'm wrong, but it seems to me a lot of the need for both environmental measurements and moisture measurements comes from the work you've done with concrete. Is that accurate to say, or is that something that's kind of both concrete and other building materials?
Yeah, I would say that it's a combination. I think you could even go further back in the history of Tramex to the roofing, to original roof testing, where they use a combination of like core samples or destructive testing with mapping. And then even in the eaves with the external insulation, when we dealt with that issue, there was a similar thing. There was a lot of pin probes. These long pins came from that, and then they were combined with scanning devices. And similarly in concrete, you do like an F2170 test or some sort of measurement test, but it's complemented by a lot of comparative testing or a lot of qualitative testing.
On the show you did before, I went back through Cliff's blog, and it was interesting for me to reread it. Moisture moves through concrete in the vapor form, but also most of the moisture found in concrete is from airborne sources. I would think a lot of our audience that's kind of new to them. They would think more that moisture problems more typically come from environmental sources, from outside sources. How do you determine where the moisture comes from on a concrete project?
Well, one of the products we developed recently, and we've actually launched it, is the concrete probe, which is now known as the determinator probe. But it's an impedance probe, so it measures when you put the meter on the surface of the concrete. It sends a signal into the concrete and takes a measurement. When you drill a hole for F2170, you can put this probe in, and it will give you the same measurement, but from the bottom up. And so that gives you a really good indication. Is the moisture coming up from the concrete, or is it coming from the environment, as you said earlier on, into the concrete? Is it coming from the top down or the bottom up? But the process is very similar. So basically, the surface of concrete is usually slightly cooler than other surfaces within a building because there's constant evaporation from the concrete. So that cooler surface can cause the condensation of moisture from a vapor into a liquid. And that's what causes the issues. Sometimes we see that coming from the air, from the ambient conditions within the environment. And sometimes we see it coming up as vapor from deep within the concrete or underneath the concrete. But at that surface point, as the vapor is coming to that cooler point, it condenses, and that's what's causing the problems. So we see the problems we see are liquid moisture, not vapor. Vapor, as you know, if you're distilling water, is pure. It doesn't carry alkalinity or anything else, as some people think, but it's the alkalinity that's already there that becomes saturated by the liquid water that causes the problems.
And Kelvin, John, if you would pull up the I think it's the MEX5. That's kind of the new product that's out for concrete. Kelvin, can you tell our listeners our audience a little bit about this particular the changes, I guess, that you've made to include more measurement capability in this particular product.
Absolutely. The MEX5 is actually not the concrete specific meter. This is a general building material meter for all types of building materials. It will give you a comparative reading on concrete, for example, but more than likely it's going to be used on top of a surface where you can test through the surface and look for moisture in below the surface in the concrete or in other building materials to get a comparative reading. It is basically the all-in-one meter for Tramex, whereas we have specific concrete moisture meters which are designed for measuring moisture in concrete that Andrew's discussing a moment ago. This is the general purpose, all bells and whistles moisture meter that carries all of our best technology to date. So in 2019, we released the CMEX5, which is the digital concrete moisture meter. And the newest innovation there was the built-in hygrometer at the surface with the with the temperature readings and the RH readings that are constantly being picked up. So that's extremely important for documentation purposes. You're every time you're taking a moisture reading and storing it, you're also recording a moisture and humidity and a temperature reading at the same time, which is vital. So the other part about that we introduced at the time and is also with the MEX5 is the Bluetooth. So our brother Dylan is the app developer, and we have 4 brothers in the company, by the way. So Dylan and Jeremy are also working within the company too. So Dylan is in charge of the technology in terms of the app, the platforms, all of the Bluetooth functionality, the TREM system, all of that end of things is all his domain. He's got a team working with him, and they're all incredibly smart people who develop this stuff for us. So the documentation that comes with these meters is now developed with Bluetooth. It's picking up readings. So there's a number of different ways to do that. You can create a moisture map. You can take a photo of the instrument, pick up your geolocation, pick up the time, date, all of that stuff. And you're picking up all of these readings at the same time, which is extremely important, where you have more documentation than possibly a contractor is intending to take, or they're gathering all of this data at one time. So apart from that, sorry, I'm going to keep going on for a moment, Joe. The Moisture Encounter MEX5 is our latest version, which also carries the built-in onboard RH thermometer and sensor and humidity sensor. But it also has the ability it has the shallow depth scale, which the ME5, which is our analog meter, carries. But it has the ability also, it has a built-in infrared surface thermometer on the back. If you can look at the back of that picture that you just showed a moment ago. So it's picking up the surface temperature constantly as well with all of the readings that you're taking. And that's another element to apart from some advanced features, which we won't go into, but there's a lot of cool functions that Andrew's put in there that allow for baseline reference readings to be stored for lots of different, the psychrometrics area of it. Anyway, it's as simple as you need it, or it's as complex as you want to get with it. It basically arrives as a simple moisture meter that tests all different building materials, and you go into the functions, into the settings, and change the advanced functions to turn on all of the extra functions, which I won't go into right now.
Now, John, pull up the concrete meter as well, and then show us the back of that, because I've always had a question I never got a chance to ask anybody. What would that be? Moisture meter?
CMEX5 would be the best one. The next one.
Next one. All right. Now look at the back of this meter, John. Go to the third photo over. I just want to show our audience those pins. How does that, why do I need those pins on a concrete meter? I don't see them on anybody else's meter, although I'm sure others are now maybe doing the same thing. But how do they improve the accuracy of your moisture measurements on concrete?
That's one for you, Andrew.
They do two things. There's an unevenness within concrete that it can help correct for. But the biggest, I guess, secret of it is it keeps the electrodes just slightly away from the concrete, just a fraction of a millimeter away, and that overcomes an awful lot of issues you have when testing concrete. Even if you use a meter like the other meter as a comparative meter, the surface of the concrete affects the readings an awful lot, and those help overcome that, basically. So it's more to do with the polished. If it's smooth versus a rough concrete, the surface will be quite conductive. So you need to sort of go over that surface, and that's the purpose of those.
And those, for those that don't know, those pins kind of depress when you push it down on the concrete. What's the intent of depressing the pin?
So you push down, and then when they're fully compressed, then you take a reading. And you know when you're using it, there's a point at which it's not a very hard push, but if you push harder, it won't change. The reading won't change, and that's what you want to get the highest reading you can.
Now, Andrew, does this also have the dual depth feature, and why would that be important in concrete?
It doesn't have a dual depth. The dual depth for concrete has to be more precise, and that's why we developed that probe, that determinator probe.
Oh.
That goes in. Is it there in an accessory?
It's in under the moisture meters on the left. If you go to moisture meters and down to CMP in the middle. Nope, just back up again to
CMP. There you go. Okay, so this okay, I see.
If you look at the last photo, Joe, sorry, that explains it best.
So that goes into the same hole that you drill for 2170, but instead of measuring the vapor within the hole, we're measuring the moisture from the bottom to the top. And therefore there's no waiting. You can use it immediately after drilling, because drilling affects the vapor within the concrete, but it doesn't affect the moisture in the same way.
And
so it's instant.
That has been an issue over the years, is that you've got to wait with the typical meter that you put the probe down into the concrete. How long do you have to normally wait?
The standard calls for a 24-hour period before inserting the probe. And that's important. That it's really important, because there's no point in waiting. Otherwise, the whole purpose of that wait is to overcome the effect of drilling the probes, drilling the hole, I mean, with the heat, and it pushes the vapor, and then the vapor comes back and it increases for a short time, and then it goes back to normal. So that 24 hours is there to overcome that time. And actually, these standards are a minimum standard. We can do it faster. But the point is, you wait before you put the probe, and then it works really well.
Gotcha. Okay, Cliff, I want to make sure you get a chance to jump in, and I know there was a text question maybe you want to ask.
Okay. Well, I guess the text question was, why does the new meter have specific gravity on it?
Good question. Will I jump in there, Andrew?
Sure. Yeah.
Do you want to do that? So specific gravity, when you're talking about non-destructive testing of wood, then the most important factor with the meter is the density of the material that's being tested. With pins, you've got such a small little space between the two pins. You're measuring between the two pins, and so it's easier to get a more accurate reading when you're testing with pins. The idea of non-destructively testing wood is to not leave marks, not leave pinholes, and to test a much larger area more quickly. It's more convenient, but it's not as precise. However, you can make it more precise by adjusting the specific gravity. What you're doing is basically adjusting the sensitivity of the scale to match the density of the wood. So specific gravity is obviously published, and it's out there in the field, and it's you've got websites that give you the specific gravity for each type of wood. But within that, it's the accuracy of specific gravity to be the same from an oak tree that's grown in Ireland to an oak tree that's grown in the United States isn't going to be the same for everything. We have incorporated the specific gravity in such a way that you could take a test with the pin probe in an out of the way area, maybe behind a couch or under a chair or something, and match the moisture meter reading with the non-destructive function, so that you can accurately get a more exact figure for that particular type of wood. And that's what we intended to use with. But it is possible to just take a reading, to take a specific gravity from a chart and say, okay, 0.6 is oak, for example. Switch it to 0.6 and say, hope for the best. But using the pin probe together is a more accurate way to do it. Would you, Andy, have anything else to add to that, Andrew?
Yeah, no, I agree with that. The specific gravity is actually a measurement of how wood floats in water. So anything over 1 sinks, Most people know that, but just to say, so it's a sort of definition of the different densities that wood can have. And as Kelvin said, that if you had an oak tree growing in a valley or on the side of a mountain, the density of the tree growing on the side of the mountain is going to be more than in the valley. So, the most accurate way is to use the pin meter and then match it with using the SG adjustment to get the same numbers. But you can do it both ways.
I'm going to rephrase another text question that we have. Are there any low-cost meters that are reasonably accurate? And I guess what they mean by that is you make precision instruments that are specific to certain types of testing and so on and so forth. You guys are the market leaders, and I think everyone realizes that, because in many situations, the standards, you made equipment that meets the standards. I guess in terms of the other folks, what's the best of the worst, I guess, is probably.
Yeah, no, I appreciate the question, because people want to use a meter. I think the important point is that the calibration matches the national standard calibration. I think that's, and if we take pin meters, which are probably the most widely available meters, we want the readings to match. In the United States, we wanted to match the forestry Douglas fir calibration scale that's available. If it doesn't match that, there's no point in using it, because the whole point of a pin meter is for accuracy over sort of large area testing. So as long as you can check the calibration that it matches, and it's not that easy to do, but there may be some of the cheaper meters that have managed to do it. You just check the calibration to that standard.
I'll just jump in there quickly, add to that if I can, is that it was an interesting thing Andrew taught me when I started working in Tramex, and he was teaching me all about the business and the scientific end of it. And one thing that he mentioned when customers asked that question was, well, if you put a piece of tape down on a concrete surface with a plastic sheet and wait 24 hours, you'll get a much better idea than you would if you put a pin probe on top of the concrete, which a lot of people still use to this day. We come across people who would say, you can use a pin meter designed for wood and place it on top of concrete to get some sort of reading, which we would not stand over or recommend in any way. But placing a plastic sheet on the surface with some tape is a much better way to look at how much moisture is still there, not by quantifying it, by seeing the presence of the dark spot to say that it's still wet.
Yeah, that's if you're using a pin meter. So that if you were using a pin meter on concrete, the answer is don't. The only time you can use a pin meter on concrete, in my view, is either if you're drilling right into the center of the concrete perfectly, so the two pins are getting a good contact at the bottom, or in circumstances where there are already floor coverings there and you're trying to get to the top of the concrete. It will be more meaningful when there's already a floor covering, because the evaporation of the surface won't happen as if it was exposed. So it is possible when you're doing some post installation testing or inspection that you can use a pin meter to touch the top of the concrete, but in general, it's not a good measurement for concrete.
Joe?
Okay. I'd like to kind of switch tracks here. I think we got most of the text questions here. And let me go back to this one, just on concrete. Are there any other that give a reasonably accurate reading? I guess some of the cheaper, simple meters in use doing concrete, and I'm not talking about a pin type, but surface type measurement. Are there any other meters that you can say give a reasonably accurate? I mean, we've been doing this for years. Not everybody has Tramex. Are we all wrong? How's that work, Andrew?
Yeah, you're all wrong. No,
we're all wrong. Okay.
No, there's a few things. There's some copies as well coming out. So, if you're in this industry long enough, you get copies. we try not to test them because, you know, we generally, if you ask the manufacturer of a product, what's the science behind why it's designed, they'll either be able to explain it to you, or they will just say, well, we copied the one that worked. You know, and if you copy the one that works, then you lose the science over time if as it's adopted, you know. So, but at the same time, our intention is to keep innovating and stay ahead and keep being the best. And one of the things with the new products is we have over-the-air updates working in the background now, which means that in time we expect that we can improve people's product while they already have it, you know. So there's a lot of things there that we're sort of working on to keep as the best as we can. I wonder if, you know, there's good secondhand meters as well, like, you know, available, especially as new products come out. There's a lot of good secondhand meters, and I guarantee if you take a 20-year-old Tramex concrete meter and you compare it to a new Tramex concrete meter in terms of measurements, you know, the numbers will be the same. That part of it hasn't changed. What we've done a huge amount of work on, and what I think is really valuable, is, as Kelvin mentioned earlier on, our brother Dylan's work on the app in the background. It's just, it keeps getting better and it keeps getting better. And because we're doing it in-house, we can keep improving it. We can add all sorts of reports. And the big part that's always been missing is the proper reporting from the technicians. You know, it's not missing, but it can be improved, you know. As I think William said on this show one time, William Thornton mentioned that he got a concrete test results written on the back of a paper plate, still had tomato ketchup on it. You know, and that's one extreme, but at least he got the data, you know. So
yeah,
with these meters, they, as you take the readings, they're in the cloud and you can share them or whatever you want. So it takes a lot of the work, the tedious work out of it.
You know, you kind of led me into the question, and you know, when it comes to technology, I think a lot of this technology really goes over some of our audience's heads. You know, not all of them are into testing concrete and so on and so forth. So what I'd like to do is, how would you explain this, I guess, to a 6-year-old? I mean, how do you explain what we do and how we do it? You know, the meter, the Bluetooth, and so on and so forth. And then I want you to explain it to a 73-year-old, which I am. So, and it might be easier to explain it to the 6-year-old because I think they're already more savvy with the computers and the technology, and they might know what Bluetooth is. But in any event, I'll give you the floor. Go ahead.
I'll try a 10-year-old, but Kelvin, do you want to go?
No, you go. You go.
10-year-old will work.
Well, you know, I'll just do an overview, and maybe Kelvin could go into a bit more detail on the, say, the TREM system or something like that. But
that's fine.
An overview is that, you know, moisture in buildings can cause problems, and moisture is either in a form of liquid, it's in a form of vapor, it could be in a form of ice, and the other form it's in is absorbed moisture. It's absorbed into everything. There's moisture in everything, with the exception of maybe some plastics, but in the majority of materials have moisture there, absorbed and adsorbed. But without going into the detail, it's there. So these devices will tell you how much of the moisture is there as a liquid form, how much is in a vapor, and how they interact. And the way I would explain it to a 10-year-old is that vapor, you know, is moisture flying. Basically, it's like Superman, you know. And to fly, it needs energy, and it takes that energy as heat. And so when you have moisture evaporating or flying from a surface, it's pulling that energy as heat, so it leaves the cold behind. And we can find that, we can measure it, we can track it, and we can use that to help us to understand how moisture behaves within the building.
That
I'll
was
try
huge.
I'll try the 73-year-old Cliff. I was going to say you look great, by the way, but
Well, I still got a couple more days till I'm 73. So that's
well, you look great for
probably
72.
next week, right?
So
But,
I guess for someone in your position who's worked in the industry, who understands the technology, understands what we're trying to measure and what we're doing, I suppose the difference, what's happening with all of this technology now is it's making life simpler, it's making work easier, it's allowing technicians to work smarter, to record readings easier, to make their job simpler, spend less time doing the paperwork when they get back. I guess it gives them chances to a chance to possibly get more jobs without having to spend all that time sitting down writing it up afterwards. And that's the intention. We're trying to make documentation much easier with this, and of course integrating with other apps and other platforms allows that even more.
Talk more about that in the second half. We're going to talk about the Tramex remote environmental monitoring system and some of the issues that come up when doing remote environmental monitoring. Before we do, we want to thank our sponsors. Our marquee sponsor is First On Site, your trusted full-service disaster recovery and property restoration company at firstonsite.com. Association sponsors are ACGIH, advancing careers of professionals in environmental health, industrial hygiene, and safety, interested in defining their science. ACGIH.org. AIHA, healthy workplaces, a healthier world. AIHA.org. The Environmental Information Association, EIA's multidisciplinary membership collects, generates, and disseminates information concerning environmental and occupational health hazards in the built environment at EIA-USA.org. The IICRC, a nonprofit standards development and certifying body for the cleaning and restoration industry, IICRC.org. The Restoration Industry Association, the oldest and largest nonprofit professional trade association dedicated to providing leadership and promoting best practices through advocacy, standards, and professional qualifications for the restoration industry at restorationindustry.org. Industry sponsors are Particles Plus, feature-rich particle counters and air quality instrumentation. Count on us, particlesplus.com. TSI Inc., an industry leader in precision instrumentation for monitoring indoor air. Learn how to expand your IAQ investigations, TSI.com. Tramex Meters, developing modern dynamic moisture meters and humidity monitoring systems since 1974. TramexMeters.com. And Healthy Indoors Magazine, a free online magazine for industry professionals and consumers, healthyindoors.com. All right, we're back for the second half of our interview. We've got Andrew Rynhart and Kelvin Rynhart. What I'd like to do, focus here on the second half, is the remote environmental monitoring system. John, can you pull the website up and show us that? And maybe we could have Kelvin kind of just explain what this does and why you've developed this.
Of course, absolutely. Why we developed it, I think, was because for many years we've been asked for it by customers. Back to our original point, the customers dictate what we do. So I think it's fair to say probably 10 years since the first time somebody asked us for could we wirelessly send information from one location to read it in an office, or I don't even know if phones were that prolific at the time. But these days you can place a sensor in a building with a hub station and pick up the readings all day long on your phone, anytime, check in on your desktop device. We can set alerts that tell the contractor that the humidity conditions or the temperature conditions have gone above or below the set, whatever they wanted to set it to say that they need alert. It can tell them that the power has gone to the system, so could mean that the power has gone on site. The system is designed to say that I'm out of power, but I'm running on battery, which will last up to 48 hours and continuously give the readings in that time. Give the the contractor enough time to get down and see what the conditions are like, see what's going wrong. What else? So I guess the questions from customers were, can I remotely monitor conditions on site? And yes, that's what we've done. It's not the first system in the world, but we believe it is one of the better ones.
Cliff, let me turn it over to you for this section.
Yeah, no problem, Joe. I kind of appreciate that. I guess first of all, from the restoration contractor standpoint, I understand all the advantages of having it in terms of saving time and getting this information and so on and so forth. And one of the things that happens in the United States, and I suspect it's happening in Europe and globally, is the insurance industry tends to weaponize technology that contractors invest in,
Sure.
trying to keep up and trying to stay ahead. Next thing you know, the insurance industry weaponizes this against them. So I guess that's kind of a concern. And how can we address that?
Andrew, you want to jump in there, or you?
Yeah, no, it's a really good point, and it's an important point to understand and to explain properly. What you're getting with remote monitoring is really 2 or 3 data points in a particular location that you set up. For somebody to use that data against you, they would have to understand it properly, and the technician should have enough understanding of what they're reading to be able to explain it to everyone. It's not more than it's a useful tool that will tell you in real time and record in real time the environmental conditions and also the moisture conditions in the materials. That's all it is. It doesn't it's really just a tool for the technician.
Well, let me ask you a question. Would it be possible to have 2 different color sensors? I got blue ones and I got yellow ones, okay? And let's say the yellow ones are mine and the blue ones are the insurance companies. Okay, so if I go out there and they want to use my data or whatever, fine. Here's my sensor, here's your sensor. It's sitting right next to my sensor. So you're going to get that, you're going to get the exact same thing that I'm getting. So we're both looking at exactly the same thing. Because one of the ways that the insurance industry weaponizes it is they look into a standard like the S500 water damage standard, and it says you must do this and you shall do that, and so on and so forth. And then they turn around and go back to the contractor and utilize readings and so on and so forth against them. So is there a limit on how many sensors one of the that you could place on a job?
I think, Cliff, as a salesman, I like that concept personally.
Okay.
The more sensors we sell, the better. So yes,
okay.
the answer is yes. With Trems, it's totally possible that the account, so the system, the sensor is associated with the account, and the same base station will pick up all of the sensors, but it won't send it to the same account. So in other words, if you're all using the same base station within the building, we can have a sensor that's on my account and a sensor that's on your account, and I can't see what's coming from your sensor, and you can't see what's coming from my sensor unless we share it with each other, which we can do. So, we can all share the projects with each other. So you could do a job with 100 sensors. I could do a job with 100 sensors, and we could share them with each other and both see each other's system if we wanted to.
Okay, so is there a way that, and I suspect that these sensors, are they measuring surface, or are they taking air measurements?
So they're doing air, humidity, temperature, dew point, grains per pound readings, but also surface temperature conditions with a surface temperature probe.
Okay.
And as well as that, they can do WME, which is basically pinning in the wall or into a wood structure, into a plasterboard structure, and monitor conditions of moisture content in that way. And there's also an external RH probe that can be placed into a concrete wall, concrete floor, and left in place and monitoring as long as the humidity conditions are not over 95%, where you have a chance of condensation.
Okay, so I want to approach it from the other side. I was talking about, insurance companies trying to weaponize this, against restoration contractors. Then you have restoration contractors that are trying to weaponize this against insurance companies. So, as a contractor, if I wanted to, how would I create bias? You follow me? How would I create long-lasting worst-case scenarios on a project?
So you mean if you wanted to extend the job?
Yes, yeah. If I wanted the job never to dry or whatever.
Well, you could, I guess, I don't want to give people ideas, but you could put a probe into a glass half full of water and cover it over and pretend it's somewhere else. I'm
right.
They're all, there's ways of misusing most technology. But in general, as long as the meter is set up correctly, it's in the room. It's just picking up atmospheric conditions and doing so with a quite a degree of precision and accuracy.
Now, the reason I asked is I had a very unusual consulting project this past year where I was asked to be an umpire on a water damage claim, and it occurred in eastern Pennsylvania, and there was a broken pipe in this house, and the house had a vinyl asbestos tile floor, and it was underneath carpet, and so on and so forth. And this happened during COVID, so there were some underlying circumstances. But in any event, the contractor had drying equipment and air scrubbers in this project for months, and he was relying on a remote monitoring system, which was not yours, by the way. And I think what he did is put pins probably into areas of wood that were in contact with the flooring and would have been the worst area, would have been the last areas to dry. And in any event, I think that's probably what he was basing this whole drying project on. And what I think could have been dried in probably a week or two at the most, he billed for months, and then he charged this daily rate for utilizing the monitoring system. And he explains, and he's citing the IICRC S500 that you should put in these monitoring systems and blah blah blah, and so on and so forth. And he never went out and checked the job, in between, because of COVID. He was afraid of COVID, and the client was afraid of COVID, and so on and so forth. And I remember asking a question of him that I never got an answer to. Was there a separate entrance to the basement? And something tells me that there was, because he never gave me an answer. So, in any event, it kind of, raised my feathers and so on and so forth. And, it's just kind of a difficult situation to have to make a choice of how much money he's going to get for drawing this project.
It's an interesting question, Cliff. And I think it's a particularly tough situation for the homeowner in that situation, and and obviously for the insurer. It would occur to me that the use of remote monitoring should improve that situation rather than make it worse. I'd imagine that could be done without remote monitoring just as easily, in terms of the him saying that it's still wet. I was visiting. Obviously, the COVID thing is unique. Hopefully, we won't have to deal with that again.
Right, but
anytime soon.
Right, but the thing is, he could have given the client a moisture meter and explained to her how to utilize it.
Yeah.
One of the things that just pops up to me just as you say that, Cliff, and sorry for jumping in,
no,
but
please.
he seems to be measuring a pre-loss condition and using that as an excuse to continue drying, which is an old trick, I believe, whatever equipment people use.
Right.
If you somehow get into something that is a pre-loss condition, then you're cheating. If you do it accidentally, one of the issues one of the big things that this remote monitoring, we hope, will bring into the industry is an upscaling of knowledge of the technicians, and, you know, getting them to use their time more smartly, you know. Because as Kelvin said, the opposite should have happened in that case. Like, he should have seen that and said, there's no drying going on here. What's happening, you know? And he should have been on site saying, well, why is there no drying? And even if he couldn't get on site, he should have been asking them to move equipment, check equipment, whatever, remotely, you know. So that should have told him, you know, that prolonged conditions that weren't changing should have told him there's something wrong. But it didn't. It just, he was able to basically cheat to say that actually it takes a lot longer than it does. And, you know, being involved in this, that it shouldn't have taken that long. And I think the majority of the people on this call would know that it shouldn't take that long. And the remote monitoring equipment should have told them there's no change. It's not even drying slowly, you know.
How often do you recommend people go out and look at this equipment and make sure it's, you know, still set up right and so on? I know it can tell you a lot of things remotely, but it seems that you need to get some eyes and ears and nose on the project from time to time. Do you have any specific recommendation?
I would say that shouldn't change. It shouldn't make a difference. It's a piece of it's equipment that the technician is using. And, you know, you get some jobs where you can get a lot of time on the job, and others, it's say big flooding events where people are stretched and they're going from one job to another, trying to, you know, manage everything. And it's just another tool to use. One of the things that we notice in the history of bringing out equipment and bringing new technology is that initially technology can be quite expensive. And so what people do is they compete. They say, well, you could cut this cost by using this technology. We saw the same thing with roofing when our deck scanner is like almost like a big lawnmower that goes along the roof measuring flat roofs. And when infrared came out, it was brilliant. I mean, infrared technology, it gives you the surface temperature monitored, and it can tell you so much information. But it became a competition. You use this or this, which made no sense at all, because one was measuring temperature and the other was measuring moisture or finding moisture. So after a period of time, that settled down, and most people use both meaningfully, you know, together. But initially it became very expensive. And this is one thing we've tried to do, is to remove the costs, the continuous cost out of remote monitoring. So there obviously there's the equipment costs something, as it always does. But once you have the equipment, then there's no continuous cost. And our intention is that, you know, this is a tool for the inspector. It's not meant to be, or for the technician. It's not meant to replace them in any way.
You know, in the United States, and I suspect it's the same in the UK, they use radar. You know, the police, the state police, so on and so forth, they use radar, you know, to check your speed. And if you hire an attorney to help you, you know, deal with the speeding ticket, one of the things the attorney always does is they challenge the calibration of the radar device. You know, when was it calibrated? Now is it calibrated? And so on and so forth. And, you know, sooner or later, if it hasn't happened already, you know, someone is going to have to defend your system in court and talk about calibration. I know you guys are big on it. How do you calibrate it, and how can we prove that, you know, it's been calibrated, or how often do we deal with calibration? So if you can answer that.
Very good point, Cliff. Very good point. And actually, it does happen. I want to point out, first of all, that obviously most of our business is in the USA, and
Okay.
you know,
Right.
Europe is very much secondary to that. So the issue is a daily occurrence where customers will call us up looking for calibration of devices because somebody's on site has challenged them and said, you know, where's your calibration certificate? And of course, you know, I have to say, most people don't calibrate their devices, but a lot of people do, and they would take it very seriously, and they do it. And we would recommend annually checking devices, send them back to us for calibration, for a calibration certificate. But in between times, we have calibration checks for all the parts of the devices that you need to check to to use on a monthly basis or bi-monthly or quarterly, whatever amount of time that you're using all of our devices, it's a good idea. So, you know, with a large organization, we'd often recommend calibration tools that they can use when they meet up quarterly or something and they can all test them and take photographs of testing them and record them with the app and show that they've, you know, I've checked my device and I know when it's in. So we have calibration. In fact, Andrew, I think you have something there that might be a useful conversation. We were just looking at before the meeting, which fits into this very well for TREMS, which, yeah, you go ahead.
Yeah, well, there's two sides. First, the sensors are calibrated to a very high degree, and again checked on leaving here. This is for RH and temperature. So with moisture meter calibration, our meters are, you know, the people are always commenting that they're amazed by how they hold their calibration over years, and they're very stable. But we have plates to check them. Our RH sensors can be a little more sensitive to condensation, to different things that they can be fixed. So checking humidity calibration is a good idea, but there's really good ways to do it that don't require as much effort as people think. I would always recommend to people to keep a master unit. You know, if you're buying a data loggers, especially for commercial drying, just keep one that you mark as and never use it on site, and then just check that one every month, and then just compare it with the others. That's much faster. You can check all of them as well, and we've worked on providing that equipment to do it. So Kelvin mentioned I have a new product here that we're about to launch, which is we supply calibration salts, and you can see there's like a bottles with you put the probes in. So they tend, you know, they're good, but they tend to be a little slow because the chamber within them are equalizing with the humidity. So we've brought out what we believe is much faster. And I don't know if I can show you with my, I noticed my computer screen seems a bit foggy. I'm gonna give it a rub. Anyway, I don't know if I can show you this, but
yeah, okay.
So this is 2 meters. I have can turn the lights on. So that I don't know if you how well you can see it, but okay. At the top there's an onboard hygrometer, and next to it is a plug-in humidity probe, and there's either these ones for doing 2170 or there's long narrow ones for building inspection. This has different chambers for each one, and you can either have the kit depending on what you want. These are for the data loggers or for the TREMS. These are, the red one is for the 2170 hygroide probes, and the other one is for the built-in probes, and then there's an attachment for the narrow probes as well. So this one I put in as we started the discussion. I put these in. They're both reading 73.2, 73 RH, 73.2. Then on the onboard, it's 73.7, and this one is 72.9. So they're all reading about 73% after about, well, how long have we been on the call? And we expect after about an hour that they will come to 75 at the most. And once and even now, actually, you can say they're within calibration because the tolerance is plus minus 2% or 1.5 on some of the sensors. So they're very close to be confirmed already. So it's,
what were those little canisters that were in there?
let me show you. I'll go through. This one is already primed, but this one is for the TREMS, for the anyone who's seen our data loggers.
Right. These
plug on. So you can see it's a 2-walled canister, as you said. So when I unscrew it, I can show you now. I'm taking out this cotton, or sorry, it's wool. I think it's that is saturated in salt solution. And in the kit, this little chamber comes with a bunch of them. They're all saturated. You just pick them out and put them into each chamber, and then you seal it up, and then the probe goes into it.
I see. So it's like buying a scale, and I have little weights to.
Yes.
Correct.
Yep.
Yeah.
So if you had pure water in there, the RH would go to 100%.
Right.
If you soaked up those cotton
Right.
cloths, but because of the salts, it reduces the RH, and it should be at 75. And then it's perfectly calibrated, and they're great sensors. They're really, and when you talk about pin meters and the different cheap ones out there, when it comes to RH, the differences are huge between the cheap and the and quality. So you're looking for accuracies of plus minus 2%. If you have plus minus 5%, it's something you could use at home over years for monitoring, but it's not something you would use on a commercial job, or even as a professional.
Where you could be challenged. Yeah. John, let's go to the roundup. All right, the roundup, sponsored by our newest sponsor, Tramex Meters. Guys, I just want to mention to the audience, we also have had some great conversation in the chat. We will put that up on afterthoughts.iaqradio.com after the show. But I want to bring in at this point the restoration industry's global watchdog, Pete Consigli. Pete, I got to give you a chance to have a few words with the audience and with our special guests.
Yeah. Well, I'm wearing all my moisture mob gear. Remember, I'm one of the consiglieres along with the Z-Man for the mob. So, I weighed in on, after listening to Andrew try to explain to the 10-year-old, I'm thinking there's no 10-year-old that's going to understand that.
One does.
I posted in the chat, maybe Einstein might, but, and as far as the 73-year-old, I mean, maybe some of the science is really not meant to be explained at that level. It's an adult conversation, but, the 73-year-old, as long as I haven't wheeled us into the home cliff, when you have time to take the kids out and you're fishing with them and waiting for the fish, it gives enough time to try to explain it to them. So if they're going to come into the moisture club, it's funny, talking about kids. So our friend John Isaacson from the Diojo, a couple of years ago at the winter break, he brought his young son out. Of course, his young son, he's always 6 feet taller. He's only like 14 or 15 years old. And he brought him out, and he was a really great helper with doing a lot of this stuff. And at one point, his name is Zeke. I said, Zeke, so why is it that you're coming to the winter break event? It was all about techno, about mold with your dad. And the kid says to me, I'm very passionate about mold. I mean, that kind of stunned me. I'm thinking, this is a 14-year-old kid who's passionate about mold. Okay, well, he's coming down the right road. He was at the right event. So, who knows what kids care about. So listen, I got a couple things to say. So regarding the question, Cliff and you asked, boy, these guys, hey, Andrew, Kelvin, so you guys are sponsors of the show and everything else, and here they're coming at you with these tough questions. It's kind of like they're throwing you under the bus, but they give you a lifeline and pull you out before you totally get crushed. The whole issue about the remote monitoring and everything, I agree with what Andrew said, is that it's just a tool in the toolbox, and I think people take it out of context. And it was interesting when he talked about the comparison with the infrared, because I remember with Lou Herman, Lou Herman was the first person to actually introduce infrared technology into our industry. And he did some training, with the WLS program back in the early days. Him and Mickey Lee picked all that stuff up. And there was a lot of misunderstandings about the use of it, because with temperature differentials, it could be air seepage around windows and not necessarily moisture. But, that's kind of evolved. Well, if you all recall, a few years after the infrared was in the marketplace, I mean, those first models that came out were like that, tens of thousands of dollars. And then they came down to be less than $1,000 for a decent meter. Well, when they first came out, there were people in the industry, and I don't know if the IICRC has one of these for certification, but they put out a 2-day.
You mean camera, not meter, right?
Infrared camera, yes. Thank you, Cliff. But they came out with the thermography class. They were offering certifications, these 2-day thermography classes, and they were teaching people how to use the infrared cameras, how not to, how to understand the false readings and the temperature differentials, the time of day, what part of the building, all that kind of stuff. And but it was a tool in the toolbox. And I think eventually, like Andrew said, the industry moved to using a combination of moisture meters and infrared camera technology, as they put these pretty sophisticated inspection toolboxes together. If you look at guys like Ken Larson, John Lapatere, they have their kits are like little mini suitcases with all the foam in there, and they're like $20,000 worth of stuff. And that kind of seems to be like what the inspectors use in the field. Now, where I think things are missing in the moisture meter area is a lack of training and technical knowledge. People are dangerous with those meters. Whether they're cheap or expensive, I don't think it matters. I think that if they don't know how to use the meters, they don't know how to interpret the information, the implications of that. And Cliff, you remember we talked about this 20 years ago when we first rolled out the WLS class. The responsibility that the technicians and inspectors have in using these meters to get this information right has huge impacts. That's tens and hundreds of thousands of dollars. Those recommendations that they make to the building owners, to the insurance companies, the government agencies, whoever's paying and ultimately responsible, has huge implications, not only in determining scope of work, but in determining, well, do people need to be living expenses? They need to be out of buildings. Is it dry? Are there health implications because they gave the bad information? And, for instance, a lot of the stories that our friends like Mike McGinnis and others talked about after Superstorm Sandy, the real problem with Superstorm Sandy didn't come out until months later in the spring when those buildings started to thaw. And the industry struggled. They didn't understand and know how to deal and dry properly in a cold weather storm event. Years later, few years ago with the Texas freeze, maybe we improved, but I think there was still a lot of problems. And most of the events are all, they've been in hot, humid climates, and it's easy to start removing moisture in there. The challenge with this dry nuts issue is a different issue, but this is what the problem is. And I think that the industry probably needs to move to having some kind of a better technical training. And I hate to say we need to get certified because there's so damn many certifications, but there needs to be some way to demonstrate the competency of people that they know how to use this instrumentation because the implications are big. And we do need to train the third-party administrators who act as intermediaries and the insurance companies and everything else. I mean, one of the other things, Cliff, you'll recall when we worked quietly behind the scenes several years ago after Katrina, and we were working through the association with the FEMA group and everything. We had a huge impact that most people don't know about, and we don't even want credit for it, but I'm bringing it up now only in the context, 10, 15 years later. But we convinced FEMA that they needed to write into their protocols that people needed to do moisture testing, some level of moisture testing, before they started closing these walls up. And they said, how can they do it? Remember how resistant they were to doing that? And we said, well, look, you can get the cheap little probe sensor things that were good to about, would beep at 17 or 18% that they could buy at Lowe's or Home Depot for $20. At least it was something that the consumers could buy, because the government said, well, you can't expect the people to go out and buy a $300 to $500 meters that they don't really know how to use. He said, no, we understand that, but you can't just feel or touch something, and then the next thing you want to do is you're going to start closing all the walls up, because that's when there's moisture trapped in there that starts to evolve over the next, the CIH is on this call, in the next 6-12 months after that, through the mold that grows through the damp materials inside those walls and the pressure differentials in the interstitial space, it comes out, the mold starts floating, and they get slow exposure, and there were health implications. And there's tons of stuff in the literature that show that. So the fact that we got them to do that, I think was huge, and I think it helped the whole industry. And but we need to probably do more in that area, that that the professionals are trained on that, and then market to the general public and everyone how important it is that they understand, how to measure for moisture, and to know that things are dry, and it's not because they touch something, or they feel it, they look at it, is there a smell in there, there's not a smell, that stuff just doesn't work anymore. And now that the technology is pretty sophisticated, and I think there is a potential that it could be used and abused, because unfortunately with the insurance industry, a lot of times, they need to have some metric, and they want a cookie cut approach everything. And unfortunately in the long run, that actually probably costs them more money, but they can get their arms around it and they can have consistency. It may not be in their best interest. So anyway, that's kind of the way it is. But in any case, I think that's a pretty important thing. I appreciate the brothers coming on. There's so much that could be talked in this subject. It's hard to cover it all in 1 hour, but I think they did the best job that they could. Yes, sir.
Pete, I think that that's a great roundup. I appreciate it. The point about training and everything else it's so important to testing. We've taken on this new meter that we were looking at. If you look at the back at this infrared thermometer there, it means we can put in the ability for measuring water activity. We can do the delta T from the dew point to the ambient, to the dew point to the surface temperature, and we can do all these different things that make it more. There's a second sort of verifiable number. If you start looking at water activity numbers and people don't give you the right numbers, it means they don't know what they're doing, and they're not trained properly. Whereas if they give you a number from 1 to 100 and say it's this is a moisture measurement, it doesn't mean anything unless they can properly explain it. So yeah, training is so key to it.
Yeah, well, and I also think too, Andrew, that look, there's 20 or so people on this call, and they're all pretty high level, but most of the impact that these shows have are the downloads, and particularly Cliff's blog, which really has the key information, and hundreds and maybe 1,000 of people will review those blogs for the key points, and maybe they'll listen to the show, maybe they won't. I think that the afterthoughts is good. Like having a guy like Bob Higgins on here, he's like the shell answer man. He starts answering the stuff in the logs. It'll be great for him to weigh in, as we go over to afterthoughts on this, because it's gonna, it's a technical discussion, and a lot of the guys in the mob and guys like Mickey Lee and Lou Herman and all, they're obviously very highly technical people and leaders in the moisture in that area. But I think that who you buy your products from, I'm talking to the contractors now, and even the lead assessors, is important, because just buying something off the shelf and buying it, whether maybe you get a little bit better price or not, but have you bought it someone that can give it a technical support? Can they answer your questions? And so not all suppliers are the same. Some people just sell on price and they're just order takers. Others want to support the customers, and they want to, they have technical departments, and their salespeople are technical people. They're not just somebody that, just wants to take an order and get a commission or whatever, or hit some quota. So I think that's important. And not everybody cares about that, and that's fine. But this is what separates, the cream, that makes the cream rise to the top. And so, anyone who's listening to this, or, Cliff always does a great job of putting the key points in the blog. He's fabulous at it. Andrew and Kelvin, he's going to finish that blog up today. You're going to get it. You'll have till Monday to comment, and then next Wednesday or Thursday it'll go out to the IAQA database. And I think that the YouTube thing will be up by the end of the day. I know a bunch of people said they couldn't make the call, but they'll listen to the interview as soon as it goes up. So that's that one thing, Andrew. I want to tell you, Andrew. I'm going to tell you right now on the air. The Aussies want you to come out there next year for their conference. It's the first week of June in Melbourne. You're one of the few, Kelvin's been out there, and Ronan's been out there. But I'm hearing from some of the Aussies, there's going to be a bunch of some real technical stuff on the program, and they want you to come out. So you ought to start thinking about Melbourne next June. Of course, I'm going to see some of the brothers and see you guys in February in Florida for the winter break event. Looking forward to that. Appreciate all your support on it. And and Cliff will be there. IQ Radio will have a show, and there'll be a lot of a lot of the other usual suspects will be down there. It'll be a lot of fun. It's going to be real special this year. It's kind of a transitional event, invitation only. That's going to transcend, until to the future events. So
I look forward to that, Pete.
All
And
right.
yeah,
and very briefly, also thank you. I appreciate everyone on the call. You mentioned there weren't a huge number, but I am really in awe at the knowledge that's here. I know many of the people, Mickey and Ed and Bob Higgins and Ralph, and also Jeff from the UK. He's on, a good friend of ours for many years. So anyway, thank you all.
I really appreciate Jeff calling in from across the pond. Thanks, Jeff. One of these days we'll get Stephen, our buddy Stephen Richard, to call. Those guys might come over for in February. They get out of that damp weather across the pond and come to nice Sunshine State in Florida at that time of year. And it's great to see these guys on the call. Anyway, it was a good show, guys. We just touched the tip of the iceberg, but it's an ongoing conversation. We'll see where it goes from there. And Cliff, I gave you a lot of stuff to put in there. Nobody could take notes and talking points like you, Cliff. You're the best at it. I really mean that. I always enjoy it. It's gotten to the point now when I review the blogs, I don't even have any comments to say anymore. And I'm not sure what that's all about. Either you're just so good or maybe I'm starting to lose it. But I don't know, maybe a little bit of both. Anyway, so Joe, good job. You did all your homework, Joe. And with the pictures, and you looked, and you're still Mr. Radio Joe, and you know how to ask those questions. And I appreciate you. Taking the time to do that and maintain the integrity of the show. Even though we have vendors and sponsors on, there are technical, informative shows, and they're not just sales pitch on the product. I think that the Tramex boys and a lot of the other people that we have on here, they do a good job at that. And so anyway, I think that's important, and I think you maintain that, and that keeps the integrity of the show. So probably blabbered and rambled on a little bit longer, but these are my boys, and that's all I have to say about that. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to you, Joe. Maybe let Rynhart have the last word, and then we wrap things up.
Thank you, Pete. And Cliff, I want to make sure if you have any final thoughts or questions, you get a chance.
I just have something pretty funny, actually. I don't know if you read what Ed said on there, that he almost shut down the Orlando airport when he forgot to put his PIN meter, left in his check baggage, and the TSI guy accused him of having a stun gun.
I actually must jump in with a quick one there. I often bring very long insulated pins through airports without any difficulty whatsoever, oddly enough. But they stop me with a little spanner every time.
A little wrench. Yeah.
And take it off me and say, a little wrench, and say, yeah, that's a tool. You can't take that with you.
Yeah. It is.
Andrew, before we go, is there anything you'd like to add? Anything we missed?
No, I was looking forward to going into a bit about water activity with you, because it was on one of the talking points.
Yes.
Beforehand. But time is short, and it's a big topic, I guess.
It is. We'll have to have you back to talk, because I remember years back now, there was, a big push toward trying to measure water activity, and there were a couple of instruments out in the field that people were using. And I'm glad you did mention it in the one segment there where you're talking about the meter that you guys just put out. And I guess just real quick, is it something that people are still trying to do? It seems like maybe you've already done it.
Well, we did it some time ago with our data loggers. If you look, when I say we did it, I've probably learned more from Mickey Lee and others about water activity than the people on this call. So, but we did something very similar before, where if you plug in a surface temperature probe into a data logger, one of our data loggers, it gives you an estimated RH, it's called. So if you touch that temperature probe to the surface, it takes the ambient conditions and then it estimates what that equilibrium RH will be at the surface. And if you just remove the percentage and divide by 10, I think you get the water activity. So if you got like 60, an estimated ERH of 65, that becomes 6.5. And maybe Mickey or someone could correct me if I'm wrong on that. But it's a combination of moisture measurement with surface temperature, and therefore it makes it, that infrared fits really nicely between the two probe meters.
Yeah, it seems like a nice addition. That I don't know if anybody else is doing that, but certainly you guys are, and I like that. And Kelvin, before we go, anything you'd like to add that we missed?
Just thank you very much for having us, and it's it's great to meet you, Joe, and great to see you again, Cliff and Pete. Thank you as always, and I look forward to looking at the comments and reading the blog later.
Perfect.
Hey, Joe.
Yes, sir.
Before you blog off, I got actually something that came up. I would make like a really final quick comment. I noticed our buddy from Atlanta, Mr. Dave Masons, and he called a little late, but he's been on there and he kind of weighed in. He was one of the first guys to go out and get a trem system, and a lot of these trem systems now are being put in all these ASD houses. So there's a lot of information that's being collected from the houses and the contractors that go to these houses to be trained. And one of the things that Dave did that was interesting is he hooked it up. I was down there and visited him one time when I was in Atlanta. He hooked it up and he was testing it around his pool outside, and he was trying to test. And this is something, Andrew, I think I told you this, Andrew, when the first meter came out in the 90s when I was working for Dry's, that first moisture encounter, I used to recommend to the contractors that they needed to take those meters out and test them in their own house, in the garage, in areas that they knew were wet, weren't wet, so they could actually figure it out. There's a level of trial and error to these things before they actually went on to jobs and tried to explain stuff to their customers. And that's where we are now with the remote monitoring and this cloud-based stuff. The contract, they need to do a little testing and understand it and grasp it first. And no matter how experienced they are, don't assume that they know everything. And I think the industry, we're going to go through a learning curve now, just like we did with the meters way back in the day. It's a lot more sophisticated and people understand that better. Certainly the guys have been doing it for a while. Anyway, I thought I'd kind of weigh in with that and kind of wrap a bow on everything here. I thought that was something good. So anyway, I appreciate all my buddies calling in there, and I'd see you guys around at something. Some event, hopefully RAA in Dallas and Winterberg, whatever. And anyway, it's a good call. So thanks, guys. And thanks to the brothers.
Thank you,
Thanks,
Pete.
Pete.
I also want to say thank you to Andrew and Kelvin Rynhart of Tramex Meters. Thanks for joining us. My co-host, the Z-Man, Cliff Zlotnick. John, you got to have faith that the controls, most importantly, our growing group of loyal listeners and our audience and sponsors. I also want to mention next week, we're going to have a show on the Johns Hopkins Model State Indoor Air Quality Act. Looking forward to that. We'll be back next Friday at noon with the next broadcast of IAQ Radio Plus.
For IAQ Radio, I'm Spike Reel saying thanks for listening.